Last Robo Jackets Technology Enrichment session. This is Trevor and Hannah from GP Robot Team 1648. Yeah, this will be our last TU session this year. We'll start again next fall, and we look forward to seeing you guys at kickoff, which is January 7th, which is going to be super exciting. So give a round of applause for Trevor and Hannah, and we'll get started.
Did you guys come to the first two sessions? All right, cool. So a few people. I was doing that one for 1648, so those two for 1648 as well. Hannah's here for the first time, so I hope you guys support her. She's going to do a great job. So some topics we're going to cover today. Golden principles. These are kind of overarching rules of first. Choosing the right path on day one. Some priority lists, cost-benefit analysis. We're going to go over a bunch of scouting topics, and we're going to conclude with alliance selection. So it should be pretty interesting. Golden principles. If you take nothing else away from this session, just this stuff today, take away these three things. You must know what you want to do before you can do it. I stressed this in the first two, so if you've listened to my other presentations before, you'll have heard this before. But if you don't know where you're trying to go, you're not going to go in the right direction. It's like trying to go north, but then going northwest. You want to know what your end goal is. If your end goal is to win states, then you need to have the right path. You need to make the right decisions to go that direction. You can't. If you're just trying to build a robot, then you're not going to go in the right direction. Always build within your means. If I have a team with $1 million budget, obviously I have a lot more capability to build something than a team with a $5,000 budget. And that's okay. Both of those teams have a place in this competition. Find a way that maximizes your resources to build the best robot possible. And third, the jack of all trades is master of none. We all have a certain amount of time. We all have a certain amount of whatever your resources are, the number of days you can meet, et cetera, et cetera. If you try to do everything in that amount of time, nobody's going to succeed. Doesn't matter how good of a team you are. But if you choose to target certain places, certain goals in each competition, you will succeed much more than if you spread it out. So day one, choosing the right path. Obviously, we get to January 7th. You come during tech kickoff. Really great day. Have a great time. What is the first thing you do? You read the competition manual. I can't stress this enough. There are people I know, and it's from good teams, who don't read the competition manual. You just don't even think of that. Don't skip that phase. Spend an hour, spend 2 hours, spend 3 hours just poring over that. The reason you need to read it, there's going to be a lot of stuff that stays the same each year right now. But the game completely changes, the ranking system completely changes, and there's always a couple of things that are different. You want to keep an eye out for. So what are your key areas to examine while you're reading the rules? First off, you gotta know the limitations on design. Obviously, there are a certain number of places where it's gonna stay the same. Robot size shouldn't change too much year to year. Weight shouldn't change too much year to year. But you still wanna check over these things. For example, Recycle Rush 2015. After you place your robot on the field, you could expand any width and length you wanted. That's completely different from most other years. So you wanna read the rules and make sure you know the exact numbers on that. How to score and how to prevent points. They're pretty much the same thing, but it's still important pieces to know. If you don't know how to score 5 points for a high goal or 2 points for a low goal, and you don't know what the difference between those two things are, that's a big deal. At the same time, if you don't know you can't cross into your opponent's secret passage, another big deal. So keep that in mind. Ranking system is probably the most important one. That's why I've started a ton. The ranking system will decide who wins and loses. I'm going to give you an example last year. You guys all know Team 1746, right? Team Auto. We remember that. Yes. So they decided at the beginning of the year, hey, we recognize that high goals are probably going to be the long-term thing. We're going to see those at Championship. We're going to see those at Einstein. But we know that if we can do the low goal, if we can score as many low goals as possible and succeed that way, get the capture and get that extra ranking point throughout the season, they were going to succeed a lot more and rank really high. In the process of doing that, they never seeded below second in any competition they went to this past year, except for Championship. And even then, they make the playoffs. So my point is with the ranking system is if you examine the ranking system properly, you'll see ways to seed as high as possible. And when you seed as high as possible, you can pick your own alliance, you go to state champs, you go to worlds, it all adds up. So when you're doing this, you need to consider all possible strategies. There's a lot of options here. So I'm going to go back to example full court mode. Full court shooting in 2013. This was an option pursued by only a few teams, but there was nothing in the rules to prevent you from scoring 54 feet away. Second thing, death cycles. if you had the right combination of robots in 2014, the ball could never hit the floor and you could score 40 points every single cycle. Things like that. And remember human players. There's a lot of years where human players make a big difference. In 2016, there were a couple of human players who could roll the ball from their castle all the way into the other courtyard. Yeah, it's pretty insane. So you keep in mind things. 2014, passing the ball with human players was really common. 2010, returning the ball through the trident. How the human players interact with the game is so important. And lastly, examine opportunities that will be achieved by a few. What do I mean by that? Obviously, we looked at the game this year, and pretty much everybody looked at it like, oh, why do we want to do the drawbridge and the sally port? What's the point? It's so hard. There's no reason to do this. There were a few teams that did this, as we saw in Einstein, as we see the championship, as we saw it in Georgia, that will do this to the best ability possible, and they'll succeed, and they'll fit this niche role that not many other teams can do. Same thing with the goalie stick. How many goalie robots have we seen in 2014? Probably like 3. There weren't that many, but at the same time, on Einstein, there was a goalie. So keep those things in mind because you don't know. And lastly, what are your goals? If you start the season, like I said before, if you start the season off and you don't have an idea, where are you trying to get? For our team in 1648, the goal is to win the state championship in the best robot engine. Your goal might be different than that. Your goal could be, let's make it to Einstein. Your goal could be, let's make it to state championship. Let's say, make the playoffs at states. Let's win a district event. There's completely different, you can have completely different goals. Our goals don't have to be the same. But if you don't know what your goals are, you're not going to build a robot to the capability that can do that. Cost-benefit analysis. So every year you're going to have to do trade-offs. Like I said before, the jack of all trades is the master of none, which means that somewhere along the line, if you're trying to build the best robot possible, you're going to make trade-offs. So one thing to do when you start this process is, like I said, once you've read the rulebook, you understand where you get points, how the rating system works. You want to weigh the difficulty of tasks associated with a scoring point value. And that's basically on a per match basis, but you can also look at it as a ranking point bonus. So for example, hanging versus high goals in 2016. There were really cool robots who hung, right? But at the end of the day, those are worth 10 extra points for just driving onto the batter, which you have to do anyway pretty much if you were climbing. But high goals, not only did you get the potential to capture, but there was a much higher scoring cap. On Einstein this year was minus 22, minus 12 on the towers. Yeah. 25 high goals sometimes scored. It was ridiculous. Yeah, it's insane. So your scoring cap is so much higher. So if you were going to be prioritizing something in 2016, high goals were your thing. You could get so much more value out of that. At the same time, in 2012, the goals weren't always the most important thing. In a balance in 2012, if you had 2 robots on that bridge, for you guys don't know, rebound rebel, score basketballs, and you had to balance yourself on the bridge. Balancing on the bridge, if you had 1 robot was 10 points, 2 robots 20 points, 3 robots 40 points. 2 robots is 20 points. At Virginia Regional and Peachtree Regional in past year, the winning scores in finals were 40 points. Which means that if you put 2 robots on a bridge, you're already halfway there. Versus each basket was scored maybe 3. And obviously, and teams weren't that great at scoring them. You maybe shot 50% at best. So then you're looking at shooting something like 12 balls total versus just putting 2 robots on a bridge in the last 20 seconds of the game. Pretty simple. It's looking at things like that. What are you going to get the most value out of? What takes the least amount of time? Then also consider the points scored for your lines are the same thing as points taken away and vice versa. If you put up a blocker in your robot and you keep a team from scoring 4 high goals this past year, that's 20 points. At worst, that's basically the same thing as adding to your own score. So keep that in mind that you don't have to just think offense, 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 offense. Defense. As we saw in Einstein this past year, it's a perfect example. The Tesla Alliance threw out a defensive robot during the semifinals and finals. And they won every single match except 1 match since they did that, right? They tied the other one. Yes, yeah. But you can be a defensive robot and succeed in this competition. You don't have to be offensive. Other things, looking for tasks that are easy and provide high relative value. That's the goal here, right? You want to find something that is the easiest of the stuff to do and provide a significant amount of points. Some of this comes with experience, some of it comes with prototyping. That is what's so important about asking fellow teams, right? So 1648 has done this for I think this coming year next year we're gonna have freshmen who are the same age as our team.
Yeah, like 14.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of us have done this before, and we've seen a lot of things like that. Your team might not have seen that. That's okay. What you're gonna find is videos online. You can ask other teams. We're all willing to provide advice. So even if you don't know, oh, hanging looks easy. We're over here saying, oh, hanging is really hard. Well, why is it hard? Explain to us. Why do you guys think it's hard? What is your experience with this? Yada yada. So even if you don't have a ton of experience, there are ways to get it. Consider doing this mathematically. So one thing I like to do is I'll go into Excel. I'll open up and say point value, 5 points. Extra ranking point is worth approximately this on day 1. And then I'll say, let's say high goal is probably 80% of the time I'm going to make it most. And then a different amount of how many resources I'm going to be spending on this versus if I do a low goal. There's going to be a lot of different factors involved. And it's all in an Excel. You can consider doing that mathematically. It should really help compare things. And then last, consider what other teams are going to try to do. There are going to be a lot of teams doing the low bar this past year, for example. If you look at 2012, there are going to be a lot of teams trying to score basketballs. So if you spend the time trying to find other ways to score points, you're going to fit into an alliance plan. If you want to be the inbounder in 2014, there's going to be a specific role for you in a lot of alliances. So especially if your goal is to make the playoffs, consider what other teams are going to try to do so you can fit in with them. Prior to this. Okay, so you've got your cost-benefit analysis done. What you want to look at is you want to say there's 2 lists I want to make. First is what are my objectives? What am I trying to do? If I'm trying to score high goals, if I'm trying to score low goals, if I'm trying to go over the rock wall, yada, yada, yada. That's one list. Second thing is robot attributes. So you want it to be heavy, you want it to be fast, you want it to be accurate, yada, yada, yada. What do you need to be? What kind of things can a robot be? And then compare the two. What do I need to go over the rock wall? Probably need to have a lot of torque in my drivetrain, right? Well, that probably overlaps with having a lot of torque to play defense. Now you can choose objectives that you think your team is capable of completing, and a lot of those will overlap each other. So you'll see, hey, if I need a lot of torque to get over this defense, well, now I have the ability to play defense. Or if I need to be fast, now I can kind of go around defenders easily. So consider those two. And then don't overlook the basics. So let's say your priority list leads you to believe that scoring high goals is the most important thing. Well, I can tell you that high goals aren't going to be scored if you don't have mobility. So obviously you need to remember, hey, I need a drivetrain. Things like that. Chokehold strategies. They're pretty rare nowadays. You're not going to see too many of them, but the idea behind them is that there is a method of scoring where if you execute your strategy, no other team can beat you. No, there's no possible way that your alliance can lose. The most famous example of this was in Zone Zeal in 2002, where Team 71 in Indiana grabbed all 3 of the center goals. And in order to do that, they had to have massive arms. But if they were able to drag those 3 goals back into their end zone, they got 10 points. Every time your opposing a robot was down on the other end of the field, it was 10 points for that alliance. So there was 30-30. If one ball is scored, now it's 31-30. They can't lose. So I encourage you guys to look at that robot because that was a fantastic robot. But that's the most famous strategy. You don't see that too often anymore. First is trying very hard to make sure that every robot has a place in the alliance. There's no one robot that can come in and dominate the competition. I think the last time we saw a chokehold strategy that wasn't really a chokehold was 2010. But you're going to find there's going to be better strategies and there are going to be worse strategies. There shouldn't be too many chokeholds, but still keep an eye out for them. Okay, so you're like 4 days into build season. 4 or 5, maybe 15 days, depending on if you're 1648, 15 days into build season. But let's say you're 4 or 5 days into build season and you realize, hey, we need to choose a direction. Where are we going? Again, you need to know what you want to do before you can start doing it. You got to choose at the fork. So, how do you do that? Simple is almost always better than complex. I can't stress this enough. If you don't think your team is going to score, for example, 2014, giant donut balls, trying to score these goals. If you're not confident your team's going to be able to score those a lot, pick the simpler option. Be a fantastic inbounder. Throw the ball over the truss where there's no top limit. Don't try to hit this small little target. Hit the bigger goal. Make your life a lot easier. What teams are looking for are consistent scorers, consistently doing their job, consistently playing their role. So being simple and having a robot that's foolproof is not only going to help you from a reliability standpoint, but it's going to help you from a picking and playoff standpoint. Stick to your priorities. You have your priority list. Don't change your path. If you know your path is right, you've done the work on the front end, then your priority list is going to take you the direction you want to go. Consider your partners. This is not a 1v game. This is not 1v1v1v1, it doesn't matter. This is 3v3, which means you have 2 partners on your offense. There were a lot of teams in Georgia last year. I think pretty much everybody in Georgia. Yeah. When they went to their first competition, could go into the low bar. There's only 1 low bar. There's not 3 low bars, there's 1 low bar. So if you have 1 robot, if every robot team can do the low bar, what benefit are you really providing yourself? You spent that extra height. You could be getting on the drawbridge or a better shot or an easier time picking up ball off the floor. There are so many trade-offs for that a lot of the potential in Georgia was lost. So consider what your partners can do. There's going to be a lot of people who can do the low bar, so we go high. And then be realistic. You're not going to build this super massive robot that dominates the game every time unless you put in the work ahead of time. Be realistic. Don't think you're going to just come out in the field and dominate. Okay, so scouting section, I'm going to hand it over to Hannah. She's going to walk you guys through this, and I'll be back in a moment.
All right, so I'm kind of sick, so if my voice starts to give out, like, give me some wiggle room. But so you've gone to competition, or you've built your robot, right? You're going to competition. How do you win? Scouting. Scouting is always the answer, right? Like, good scouting will give your team the ability to know the capability of both every robot at the competition and the capability of, like, the drive team, right? And know their strategy, all that kind of stuff. So the first thing about scouting is if you do it right and you do map scouting right, especially, you can look in and see if teams are improving. You can see different teams' consistency on like a million different factors. Like anything you choose to track, you will know about any team. And then, so if you're not on the drive team or in the pit crew, if you're not scouting, you don't really have a role at competition, right? And so having a dedicated strategy team and making, I guess, kind of forcing everyone on your team to scout allows them to see the game in different ways that they would not have if they were just there to build a robot, right? And then they're not on drive team or pit crew. And they also get to know what other teams are doing. It allows people of your team to learn a lot more about first. And then you need to know what everyone else is doing to know what you need to do, right? Trevor talked a lot about how this game is not 1v1, it's 3v3. You need to know everyone on your alliance, you need to know your enemies, the people on the opposing alliance, if you want to know what to do, right? Does that make sense? Like, for this year, for example, we had defenses. And if you wanted to play a good game, you needed to pick the right defenses. And the only way you were able to do that was through scouting. And then even if you're not a person or a team who knows you're going to be picking or knows you're going to be picked, scouting is the way to get you there. You can have a drivetrain, like just like a really simple robot, just like wheels and a chassis, right? Bring it to competition, have a really good strategy, like you could be a really good defensive robot and make it to finals, like win states, just because you knew what all the other teams could do. Okay, oh yeah, so I have a really good example of why scouting is important. So in 2013, our team went to this week 1 regional, Palmetto, and by luck and some really weird ranking points that we got, just by luck, we ended up being seeded first. We didn't scout, and we got knocked out in quarterfinals by the 8th seed Alliance because we just kind of picked random teams. We were first seeded, our robot wasn't great, and we didn't do well when we could have. Okay, so I'm gonna go over 3 main types of scouting systems, I guess. The first is paper, right? It sounds like it is. It's just a bunch of sheets of paper that you have your scouts write data on and then you look at, right? The main way to do this, the one I personally recommend is having a sheet for each team. So you just write down the team numbers of all the teams at your regional, and then you just have like one row for each game. Like if each team plays 15 matches, you just have 15 rows and one sheet per team. You can also do it like 15, you just have like one sheet per match, which gets really rough. It's hard to organize. I wouldn't recommend it. But so this can be executed by not a lot of people. You just need, hopefully, one scout for each robot, for each match, and then someone to pass out papers and organize them at the beginning and end of each match. So paper scouting is something that's really easy to implement, especially if you've never done scouting before. We did it our first year of scouting. It can be made like 2 nights before competition, which is really useful if you don't really have time to get something all that complex together. And you don't really have to have anything other than like access to a computer and a printer and hopefully some kind of accordion folder. But there are some serious downsides to paper scouting. It's really hard to keep organized when you have a million sheets of paper that can easily get lost. And if you lose one, like you're done, right? You can lose data on an entire team really easily. And then looking at like 70 sheets of paper and trying to come up with like rankings, who we want to pick, it takes some serious time. And it's really hard to come up with like you can come up with like serious strategy, you have to pour through everything, which becomes really tedious. So the next one is hybrid. It's like paper scouting and like electronic scouting. So you're still going to have those sheets of paper, but you're going to have someone enter them into an Excel database on someone's laptop, right?
It really can be any kind of database. It can be Access, can be a Java database, whatever you're trying to do, Google Sheets, etc. Yeah.
And this is, it's most teams use it, right? It's complex enough that you can get pretty good like data collation from it, but it's also simple enough that you don't have to have like too many resources and time put into actually making it. It can be fairly simple. So once again, you're going to have your one coordinator to pass out paper sheets and collect them at the beginning and ends of matches. You're also going to still have your hopefully 6 scouts to watch every robot, but this time you're going to need a couple people sitting there on laptops or like Kindles or whatever you choose to input all the data. And so it's harder if you only have the minimal number of people free. And it also means you have to train more people going into competition. So hybrid scouting, if you have the resources to make a database, like I said, it's fairly simple. And then it may take like maybe 2 weeks to set up. It's more than like a week or a couple days before competition. But if you have dedicated people on it, you're good. And also, because you have so many people like looking at the data, and if you have your database set up in a way that you can look at statistics, it's really solid. There are a lot of different things you can do with a hybrid system that makes it really good. Yeah, and also because you have your data enterers looking at every sheet, if your scouts who might be kind of untrained, they're not really super dedicated to the game possibly, if they make some massive mistake, like write that some team had 20 crossings in a match, you have your data enterers there to kind of like buffer that and make sure major mistakes like that don't corrupt your data. And then also, since you don't have to have anything that like the laptops you program on, you're not going to have to put a ton of resources into it. But a hybrid scouting system requires a lot of time put into it every year. You can reuse systems that you've already made, but there's like a significant amount of editing that goes into your database and the sheets you use. And also, like I said, like if you have a really small team, it becomes harder because you have to have those data entry people. So the next type of scouting is electronic. So essentially, instead of your scouts writing data down on paper sheets, you have them enter it through like a tablet or a laptop or their phone. And it gets sent to some kind of database that you can look at, right? Citrus Circuits 1678 does like a really, really good job of this. How they do it is they have like 6 Android tablets that are all hooked up to like a Raspberry Pi that sends the information to a server that any one of their team can access through like an iPhone app. It's like top quality. It's really good. But that takes a ton of resources to pull off. You have to write an app for the Android tablets. You have to write a server. You have to write an iPhone app. It takes a lot of time and money and knowledge to pull off. And that's just generally how like electronic scouting is. Yeah. So once again, you're gonna have like your one coordinator and about your 6 scouts. Of course, this can vary because electronic scouting can be done a lot of different ways, but it's about the same, right? So being able to immediately have that data pulled up is really useful. It's really fast, and also because a lot of it can be done on like a drop-down menu, you can eliminate a lot of human error that goes into paper and hybrid scouting when people are just writing things down. People's handwriting is ridiculous sometimes, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, like I was saying, it's kind of expensive. You have to buy all these different devices. You have to write all these different things. But yeah, so here are some diagrams of how the data works. So up there, it's just paper scouting. You have a coordinator, and they just pass the data over to scouts who fill it out. It doesn't go beyond there, right? Hybrid scouting, you have your coordinator, the scouts put in the data, and then you have a couple people doing data entry. So like I was saying, like the data entry people can hopefully account for some of the human error that goes in when your scouts are just writing stuff down on a paper sheet. And then it's kind of similar for the electronic system up there, where you just have coordinator, scouts put in the information, and then it goes to your database. So match scouting is most of the time just purely quantitative data, right? Just numbers that your scouts can easily track. But you need to know more than that to make informed decisions at a competition. So one is going around and looking at everyone's robot, like pit scouting, and then the other is having normally like experienced scouts sitting in the stands and taking notes on each match, or about each match. So pit scouting is mainly looking at their robot and asking the team about their strategy, asking what they think their robot can do, asking if there's anything that you might not witness by just looking at, qualification matches. They might say, for example, this year, hey, we're building a climber, and if they never bring out the climber for elimination matches, you wouldn't know unless you went and talked to them. If they're saying things like, hey, we can do 8 cycles on a low bar, and then their robot breaks down every match. Yeah. And then you're also able to look at their drivetrain, you're able to look at their different mechanisms, just so you get like a general idea of what the robot is. And then qualitative map scouting is, like I said, you have experienced scouts sit up in the stands and try and look at what their strategy is, how they're driving. If the robot breaks down, you can take note of that, because obviously if you're just looking at like a bunch of zeros in a spreadsheet, you can't really tell what went on in the match. So that's why qualitative map scouting is really important. Like if you see a robot like circling around in the middle of the match, but like obviously not knowing what to do, but their numbers look really good, you can easily make a really uninformed decision about how their team works. Yeah. So we've been hybrid since 2014. Like I was saying earlier with match scouting, it's just quantitative data. It's stuff scouts can easily look at and then see and judge. We also kind of have them take notes on the match. Like we have a comment section, we ask them to put down things like if the robot breaks down, how long it's broken down, what the cause of this breakdown is that they can see, stuff like that. If the robot looks like it's going to fall over during a match, how they're driving, all that kind of stuff. And then for pit scouting, we mostly just go around and try and get to know the robot. We take pictures, we ask our scouts to fill out stuff like how many wheels in their drivetrain, do they have a climber, simple stuff. And then for alliance selection, going in, like Friday night, we make a pick list, we pour through all our data, we have like our strategic team, which is those qualitative map scouts, we have data enterers, drive team, all those kind of people, and we put together like a rough pick list, and then just the next day it'll be edited. And even if we're not planning on being an alliance captain, having a pick list is extremely important because you never know if you're going to get picked. Yeah, and then so the DNPs are something you don't have to do. It has its advantages and disadvantages. If there are some teams that you absolutely do not want to work with, and if you get picked, you want to make sure the alliance captain absolutely does not pick these teams. It's useful, but it does eliminate teams from your pick list, right? And if you just immediately cross a team off, maybe because of like a personal feud, or one time during that match they made a really bad decision, so we're never going to pick them. You can cross off some potentially good alliance partners, especially because DNPs can get really opinionated.
DNP stands for do not pick.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. So when designing your match scouting, pit scouting sheet database, you have to keep in mind that the scouts in the stands, probably are not super invested in actually taking down data, and B, are probably not all that knowledgeable about certain rules of the game. Sitting a bunch of high schoolers down over a weekend and asking them to sit down and take numbers, high school students don't want to do that. I don't want to do that most of the time, right? It's not interesting. It gets really boring easily. So you have to make sure that there are really clear-cut lines between what counts as like a tally mark on your sheet and what doesn't. So for you want to pick things that are really easily visually seen, and things that you don't need to know all the rules on. Like if I'm sitting there and asking my scouts to tell me how many times a robot fouls on the field, it's just not going to happen because they don't have the knowledge of those rules maybe, and it's really hard to tell when a robot fouls. But like for example this year, it's really easy to see when a ball, if you're just watching one robot, it's really easy to track a ball trying to go into the goal. And it's also really useful, like shots attempted, scored. So we had our scouts take down tally marks, because having scouts keep numbers in their head, there's a ton of room for error there. Like if I just sit down and track how many times a robot crosses and then write it down at the end of the match, it's never going to be accurate. And that's another thing you need to keep in mind when designing these sheets, is you need accurate data, but it also needs to be really easy to take down. Yeah. And then there are a lot of things that I'm going to talk about over-scouting in a second, but keeping your scouting sheets really simple is important. Not only because if you have someone try and track too many things, you're never going to get accurate data, also because it'll be really tiring for your scouts. And especially if things go unused. Sorry, I'm talking too much about over-scouting. But if you pick data that is going to be, it's going to be a number taken down every single match, then that's something you definitely want to keep. If you're trying to track, like I was saying, fouls earlier, it's not something that happens every match. It's not something that you can look out for every match. And you're just never going to get accurate data on it. And then, so for example, this year, if you're trying to take down data on high goals, for example, right? It's easily, you can easily say, okay, high goals and autonomous are extremely different from high goals during teleop. But does it make the difference between endgame and teleop, right? Obviously, their strategy can differ. And keeping that in mind when you're making your sheet can tell you a lot more. You can get a lot more from just like simple numbers. And then, like I was saying, over-scouting. So your scouts need to be able to get everything down in a match for you to have accurate data, for your scouts to be happy. And so if you're looking like after your first competition, if you look through the data and you see entire columns that you never really looked at or considered, your scouts don't need to handle that. Just like go ahead and eliminate it. And if things are constantly like, for example, this year, we had our scouts constantly not correctly fill in number of crossings. And that was partially like a training thing. But another thing we never really got accurate data on is fouls. And so it's something that we just needed to completely eliminate, because the more minimal you make your scouting sheets, the more accurate your database is going to be. All right, I'm going to hand this off to Trevor.
Cool. So you guys have any questions for Sean? This has been a lot of information really fast. Okay, all right, so we're going to keep moving. So I know there's a lot of teams in here that maybe you have 5 members, maybe you have 7 members, or not everybody goes to competition, you don't bring a whole 17. And so we're throwing numbers out there. You need 7 people or 10 people on scouting. And this is not going to happen. You have to commit some members to being in the pit. You've got to commit some members to driving the actual robot. So there's definitely limitations on this. But that doesn't mean you can't scout. Hence the point, collaborative scouting. It's a key to scouting as a low resource team, because if you expect to do the same thing that we do, if you expect the same to do that 1261 does, if you expect to do the same thing as 1114 does, or 1678, and you don't have the number of people you need, it's just not going to happen. So you need to pair up with teams, make your life easier. And so what normally it means when I say collaborative is it involves collaboration between 1 or more teams to collect and distribute scouting data. So let's say team number 1000, for example, has 5 members that can contribute scouting. They need another member to get that right. Let's say team 4000 over here has 2 extra members. They need scouting data, but they can't do scouting on their own. If they combine their number of members, now they have the required amount of 7 to do an effective system. So if they pair up, they're going to get data together. Not one team has to own that data. They can have the same data. They can come to completely different conclusions based on that data. It was never a problem to have. One of the great examples is by Team 20, the Rocketeers. One thing they do, especially at championship, is they'll ask a bunch of teams, hey, I know you guys are only bringing 6 people to the championship, and 4 of those people are on a drive team. But you guys need good data too. Maybe you're a really good team that just can't bring people. So we're gonna allow you guys, hey, come to our system, come learn our system, and we'll give you the data when it's over. So systems like that are really useful to take advantage of. So an important thing when doing this is you need to come to an agreement beforehand in order to make sure that everybody meets the requirements. So if you require 1 person to be there from a team to complete data, okay, if they send that 1 person and that person contributes, that's fine. If you need 3 people, well, if they send 3 people, they get that data. And you come to an agreement between the teams. Make sure everything is clear, you guys understand what you're trying to get to. Make sure every participating team gets the final data. If they do it, they need the data. It's not fair for a team to not get data. So as soon as you have it in its final form, send it off, send it off, send it off. Don't wait, and don't wait till the last minute to do it too, because if you send it to them 5 minutes before alliance selection and then expect them to come to good conclusions, that's not fair to them. It's not fair to anyone else. So, for example, with our team, we had a couple teams last year, I think at Albany, right, that needed a little bit of data just to help in case they were going to be picking a team. Both of them ended up being a first pick or an alliance captain. You know, we sent them our data and say on the night before and said, hey, make your conclusions. This is what we found so far. things like that. So what if you don't have enough people to contribute to a scouting program? Let's say your team only brings 4 people. I think 4701 had that situation last year, right? Go ahead and ask. Obviously, we're going to be at Gainesville, Columbus. I think 1261 is going to Albany. You know, there's a bunch of teams that have these full scouting systems that have this data. We would love to give it to you guys. They would love to give it to you guys. So take advantage of that. You're going to find that they will easily hand it to you, and if you take advantage of this, you're going to have a lot more opportunity to succeed down the line. Lastly, what if there aren't any teams that want to work together? There should never be the situation. It's first, gracious professionalism. Everybody should be willing to.
Oh no, I got it.
Everybody should be willing to contribute. This shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a problem. But more to the point, let's say nobody else has enough people to be collaborative scouting. You have a few other options. Remember, the field is divided into 2 halves. You have red lines and blue lines. Let's say you have 4 people. If you spend 3 scouts over there, that's really going to help. At the same time, if you're sitting over there, let's say 1 person who can scout, sit in the stands, watch matches. Don't give up on the situation just because you don't have a full system. Watch a couple matches. Watch the teams. You don't have to have perfect data. You don't even have to have great data, but you could use some of that qualitative map scouting Hannah was talking about. You could watch girls. What are they doing? Is their driver intent good? You're going to know the top. You're going to know the top teams. It's not going to be hard to say, oh, wow, 24-15 scored 8 high goals that match. Wow, that was incredible. I can't believe they did that. You don't need to know that. That's easy. That's the easy stuff. It's the more important. Hey, you know, those drivers know what they're doing. They executed their strategy exactly how they should have. We want them on our lines. So utilizing your data. You want to condense everything into the most effective statistic possible as soon as you can. Because if you skip this step, you're going to find yourself looking at things like, oh, how many high goals did they score in the end game? Or did they ever climb? If you look at those things alone, you're not going to get an effective team. What you're looking at, you're looking for the most important statistics. So decisions cannot be made nearly as easily on individual match stats. For example, 24-15 at Kennesaw scored 8 high goals in 1 match, right? During a qualification match. That's great, that's fantastic. But if you make a decision based solely off that, let's say they did well for the entire competition for making them first. But let's say they scored 0 high goals the rest of the time. Then that 1 match kind of looks like an outlier, right? So you want to condense all that data as soon as you can. And remember that sample size is important. If a team is only active, let's say the robot dies for 6 matches out of the 12, and then for the other 3 of the other matches, they don't do anything. The only data you have on them is 3 matches of data. That's a lot. That's a really small sample size. So consider if they're doing things really well for 11 out of 12 matches and then have 1 bad match, that's a situation where you can probably say that match is an outlier. I can believe in these 11. The more data you get, the better. So keep getting as much data as you can. Have someone prepared to make decisions based on this data. The reason why we say 1 coordinator, sometimes you don't need a coordinator. For electronic systems, you probably don't need a coordinator. For even a hybrid system, you could arguably say you don't really need a coordinator. But you need at least 1 person to make actions based on the data. They're probably not going to be a scout. Because for a scout, you're sitting there, oh, I got to know what team's coming up. I got to break down the data. You're spending 4 out of every 7 minutes in the match cycle not paying attention to the rest of the tournament. So if you could have 1 person take the time to look over this data, and it can be a drive team member. It can be, as long as they get the data, they can do this. It doesn't have to be a completely separate individual. Consider your alliance partners first. When doing match strategy, you have opponents and you have teammates, right? You have 2 teammates and 3 opponents. Almost always, your match strategy is more important than the other team's match strategy for 3 reasons. First off, if you look like your team has a match strategy, and I am out there looking for a 3rd pick, and I see, wow, or first pick, and then, wow, that team did really well. You know, they understood what they're doing. That's going to register a lot better in my mind. So if you set your alliance partners in front of the line instead of worrying about your opponents first, you're going to have much more success offensively. And generally, that has a higher impact on the result. Not only because you are more likely to win if you score points, but because qualification matches feature less defense and tiebreakers, auto points, tie goals, crossing points. Those are all based on offensive statistics too. So you want to make sure that you're getting as many points as possible. And you have a better ability to influence the alliance. if you come to a meeting with your alliance for the next match and they say, yeah, we want you to do this, this, and this, even though this, and this may not be exactly what you're good at, you can come to them and say, okay, we are really good at this, as we can show with our data. And you guys are really good at this, that other thing that you guys are telling us to do in our data. So how about you guys do that, we'll do this, and all of a sudden you have a much better match result. Consider your opponents. You can't completely, okay, that's not true. 2015, you can completely ignore your opponents. But otherwise, you can't completely ignore your opponents. You have to consider that there are going to be there's another alliance across the field from you who is either trying to A, outscore you, or B, defend you. And you have to come up with an answer for that. If you see that alliance, hey, that alliance is a really good defensive robot, expect defense. Account for it. Where can I go to keep myself from being defended? What strategy are you going to take to avoid that? Versus, let's say the opponent has a robot that's sitting in a really easy spot to be defended. I think one team that was all over this last year was 4188. A lot of times, especially their first couple competitions, they would sit right in front of the high goal. While it was fine, they were one of the best high bowling teams at Columbus in the first competition. It was a really easy spot to defend. So eventually teams started keying on, hey, if I park a robot in front of the batter and I just push 4188 when they're about to shoot, they're going to miss. So notice things like that. And then combine observations to develop the ideal strategy. It is not always ideal to have 3 robots playing offense. Right? Obviously. Let's say last year we had a really good alliance example of this. You had 6177, you had 5651, and you had us. It was great. It was fantastic. It was a great time. We recognized that we have a couple teams, we were probably the robot that could score the most in that alliance. And then those guys could do the defenses really well. So once the defenses were all cleared, though, there was no real way to contribute points anymore for them. Well, if you drive back into the defensive end, now you're contributing to the alliance, you're still contributing to the score, you're still contributing to the win. And that was really important. Lastly, bring enough data and ideas to your coach meeting to prove your point, but do not rely solely on data. What do I mean by this? Overall, 2 things. You want to be GP. Don't say, you were doing this because our data says this. Don't do that. Second of all, it looks really bad to come to the meeting with a paper sheet in your hand and reading off of it and making your decisions based on that. Just saying, oh, the data says this, you guys should do this. You want to come to the meeting with enough data to say confidently, I think we should do this. But if your opponent, your alliance partner is saying, hey, I think we really want to try this. Let's say we had a low goal shooter, but now we've got our high goal shooter ready. And if you haven't seen any data from that say that their high goal shooter's not good, give them a chance. Give them a chance to prove their stuff. Because they, just like you, they're trying to succeed in this competition too. So if you give them space to do things, A, they can succeed, and B, you'll act a lot better down the line with them. So you'll have much better relations. And that can come to help in alliance selection. I know all the time teams pick teams based on friendships and who do they work well with. That's a really important factor. Okay, any questions so far before we get to checklist and alliance selection? This is either we're going way too fast and they're not getting anything,
yeah,
or we're probably going too fast, but or hopefully they're going to make something out of it. But developing a pick list. So number of teams on the pick list. Obviously, 24 teams make the playoffs in pretty much every tournament except one. So that's going to be your starting point. Subtract 1, because you're going to assume you're in the playoffs. If you're not in the playoffs, you don't even need a pick list, but you want to assume when you're making one that you are in the playoffs. You can also add a couple for declines. Sometimes teams will say, I don't want to play because my robot's broken. It's pretty rare, but sometimes it can happen. So at most, you're saying 25 teams on your pick list. Pretend you're number 1 seed. You have the first and last pick. Doesn't matter if you actually are the number 1 seed. The point is you want to have every team ranked. So if you sat down as the number 1 seed, right, I want this team first, and then I'm going to wait to see what falls out. If every team on your list is picked, you have 1 left at the end. See it? So after that, identify a role for your team in a playoff winning alliance. Now, obviously, if your goal is just to make an alliance, this is less important. But at least for our end, and I know a few you guys' end too, you want to win the tournament. That's the goal of making the playoffs. Consider that you want to build an alliance that can make it that far. So for us, example last year, we sat down and said at the end of Columbus, hey, we want another robot that can finish. We were scoring low balls all the time. We want another robot that can help us breach, because who can do the B defenses last year very well. And we want someone who can contribute a few locals. That was our first pick. That's what we saw is, hey, if we're on alliance, this is the robot we want with us. And then for our second pick, we said, well, we know other teams might not be able to get captured. We want to prevent that from happening. So we want a good defensive robot who can get over a couple defenses too. And that's where we got to our alliance. We played a 1746, awesome team, and then we played with 3091, who filled out that second robot perfectly. So you want to, that's something to consider, is where do you see yourself in a role with this alliance? And that strategy, if you think about it ahead of time, is going to be a lot more successful. Determine the qualities you desire in your alliance partners. Like I said, we wanted someone who could score low goals and can go over defenses. That's what we look for. So you want to identify those qualities. Examine which of these qualities is most valuable. There's a team, let's say there's a team that hangs. That's really great. It's fantastic, it's awesome. But if another team out there can score 3 or 4 low goals, and your team can score 4 low goals, and now you've reached the capture point, that capture's worth 25 points. A hang for 10 points isn't going to get you anything beyond. Consider things like that. Ignore the standings mostly. In terms of making a pick list, the standings don't really matter. How often have you seen a team that was ranked number, raise your hands. How many of you guys have seen a team ranked number 1 that wasn't the best team there? Yeah, pretty much everybody can raise their hand on one. Almost every tournament, not every tournament, but a lot of tournaments every year will have the best team not be the number 1 seed. Almost every year. So you want to make sure that you don't rely on the standings to give you data. At the same time, sometimes you need to consider them. I'll give you a good example. In 2012, on one of the divisional fields at the championship, there were 4 really, really good robots. 2826, 2056, 67, and 1114. 2826 was the first seed. 2056 was the second seed. 67 was this 8th seed. And then way down at 66 was 1114. These are all really good teams. Exceptional, world championship caliber teams. 2826 has the first pick, right? So looking at the standings, if they had a queue up, if you go with 1114 can decline. They pick 67. 67 can decline, and 2056 can also. They end up choosing 67. Now that's not a problem. 67 is really good, right? Well, what's the problem with that? Well, now 2056 can say, hey, I want 1114 to join my alliance, right? Well, let's say 2826 would instead pick 2056. Now they're on the same alliance. Who's ever number 3 moves up and takes the 2056 spot. They're not going to be the same team as 67 or 1114. They're not going to be as good. So what happens now? Well, that 3 seed should then consider, hey, I want 67 to join my alliance, or I want 1114. What now creates is that those 2 teams would be split up, so that these 2 teams would never have to face these 2 teams together. So sometimes you can consider things like that. Rank the teams. You want to combine qualitative and quantitative scouting. Like Hannah was saying before, if you solely rely on your quantitative data, you're going to miss something. Sometimes a team is really, really good at scoring high goals, but they just don't seem like they understand where they're supposed to go. Versus the team, let's say, might be a little bit less good scoring high goals. Let's say they score 4 instead of 5. But they clearly know where they're going. They go over the right defenses, their pathing makes sense. You can see their coach is making the right decisions, he's communicating well. That is going to be the team you want. Because you're going to get more consistency, you're going to have a higher potential. Executing alliance selection. Okay. Alliance selection is hard. It's hard for a lot of teams. So there's going to be a lot of mistakes, and with the scouting data you're going to see other teams. Let's say our team might value one team differently than another. You can completely, you're going to see things that you're going to call errors. And that's because alliance selection is inherently hard. It's not easy. But there's a few things you can do to make it easier. First of all, choose a student representative that has these 2 quick traits. They are familiar with your pick list and the robots at the event. If you have someone who has not paid attention to the entire event as your student representative, and you are going out there with a pick list, it is not going to end well. I promise you this. They need to know who they're picking. They need to know what team name it is, they need to know what their robot looks like, they need to know what that robot can do at a basic level. They don't have to be the most well-versed in strategy, they don't have to know everything. But if they know the basic things about those robots, you're going to have a lot more success. They need to be very good at accepting instructions. What do I mean by this? So, let's say halfway through this last round of selections, you realize that, hey, we didn't value this team well enough. That team, our opposing alliance, has 3 really good scorers, and the next team on our pick list is an offensive player. Well, what if we pick a defensive player and interfere with them? So you want to send an instruction to that person. You want to say, hey, if this situation happens, do this instead of this. And things like that. You can send them a text. You can do a ton of things. There's a lot of ways to send messages. Holding a whiteboard. You can do pretty much anything. They need to be good at reading those instructions and then acting upon them. So those should not necessarily be based on seniority either. Because if you have someone who's going out there as a senior who really isn't paying attention, they're going to be less valuable than a freshman who's much more engaged in the system. So make sure you're not just saying, oh, well, he's a senior, he's our captain. Let's send him out there. Or maybe she's really good at this. Maybe she's our lead scout. Let's send her up there. Let's see what happens. Make a physical copy of your list. If you're just tapping away at your computer, you're going to find that it's very difficult to transfer that somewhere else until you make a physical copy. So you want to give that copy to your representative, or you want to keep that copy in the stands and send a representative with the digital copy, one of the two, so you always have a reference. You cannot lose that reference. Understand who is on your side of the bracket. In FRC, with the exception of 2015, which was a weird year, so we'll remember that. 2, 7, 3, 6. Right? So what I mean by side of the bracket, draw a line right between these two. Your goal is to get to here. You want to get to the finals. So you need to know, hey, I'm the number 1 seed. This is what the number 8 seed can do. This is what the number 4 seed can do. This is what the number 5 seed can do. Right off the bat, you want to know, hey, this alliance is building with this team. These alliances are building with this team. Let's counter that with our second pick. Consider things like that. And the same thing applies here. So know what's on your side of the bracket. Talk. I can't emphasize this enough, but let's say 1648 is the number 1 seed in our first edition. We want to know who's interested in playing with us. We want to know who we work well with. We want to know who's interested in this tournament. If nobody comes to us, we're just going to say, oh, there's no tiebreaker. But if a team comes to us who has similar statistics to another one, and they introduce themselves, they say, hey, we want to play with you guys during the tournament. We think we work really well with you. And we'll go, okay, how do you guys work really well with us? Explain. Now all of a sudden we see interest. We see that you guys are actively engaged and wanting to play with our team. We're way more likely to pick you. So when you're walking around at the end of competition, you're waiting for alliance selection to start, go talk to people. Heck, even before that, we start talking to teams about who we want to play with first day. Yeah. Go to teams that you see are doing well, or that you work really well with, and say, hey, we want to play with you guys later. We want to be involved in alliance selection. We want to play in finals. Be prepared to pivot. Like I said before, let's say there's a really good defensive robot that's available. Be ready to pivot. Let's say you forgot a team on your pick list. Be ready to pivot. You want to be able to switch gears. Goes along with that communication aspect. Scorched earth. This is a very specific scenario. Like I said before, whoever has a team that there's a team in first place who you're like, wow, how did they even end up in the first place? We don't want to play with them at all. That happens way more often than you think, right? Scorched earth is a process that makes it so that none of the top 8 can pair. Nobody. So how do you do this? Let's say you seed first. You want to go talk to teams that you want to play with for your pick list. Let's say we're the number 1 seed, and another team seeded 4th is the team we're planning on picking, but they don't want to play with us. So we're going to go to them, we're going to confirm that, and then we're going to pick them anyway, because so that they decline. And once you decline, you can't accept. So for example, let's say there's a team in this number 3 position that didn't want to play with 28-26. 28-26 should invite them, so that if they don't end up taking 2056, now that 3 seed can't accept an offer to that 2 seed. So what you end up creating is you create a line to the top that's going to be much stronger than anything anybody else can create because none of those upper pairing teams can come up. Really a process of talking to teams, knowing what the situation is, knowing what robot's number one. Explode. Last tips. Things go wrong. Things change. Maybe your circumstances at the beginning of the season were a little bit different from a resources perspective than otherwise. Maybe halfway through the year, you now have access to a water jet. You can do so many more things with your robot. There are going to be times where things like that change. Jump on it. Make things happen, and then adjust accordingly. Sometimes you'll have a negative effect. Somebody's really sick for the rest of the year. You know, cold season, flu season, you're out for a week. Your human resources decrease. What can we actually get done? Adjust your strategy. And same thing that happens during competition. Maybe your robot's awesome arm that was dunking balls into the high goal broke. Well, now you need to come up with a new strategy. Keep the refs on your side. What do I mean by this? You guys have all seen in competitive sports where the refs will sometimes make these really weird calls. Oh, that wasn't a hook. A lot of times that has to do with reputation. There's a lot of really young teams in here, so I hope you guys take advantage of this. But you want to be nice to the refs. You want to respect the refs. Keep them on your side. You want them to play. You want to play fairly. You want them to play evenly. You want the rules applied to everybody, and you don't want to be that team that's like they're waiting for you to make a foul. Don't be that team. So be respectful of the refs. Lastly, nothing is more important than inspiring students and having fun. I can't stress this enough. You don't want to be so intense at competition that you are detracting from the rest of the people. You want to take the time to realize that you are probably, if you're a student, that's great, fantastic. A mentor, you want to take your time and step back. Recognize that at the end of the day, this is all a vehicle for inspiration. So don't be too intense. Don't invest so much in this that you're not getting that result. Okay, so any questions from anybody about anything we had in this presentation? Yes?
I kind of missed about what you were talking about, scorched earth. Can you explain that again?
Scorched earth is basically, so the question was, what is scorched earth again? Basically the process of making sure that none of the other top 8 teams can pair up with each other. Remember that the rule in alliance selection is that if you decline, you can't accept another invite. So for the 2 seed, this doesn't really matter, but for the 3 and beyond, if you invite the 3 seed and they decline, they can now not join the 2 seed down the line. It's just not, they just can't. So what you do during Scorched Earth is then you pick all of the teams. You pick as many as you can before one accepts. And that requires knowing who wants to accept who, but if you do that properly, now you're keeping some really strong teams from pairing up. Best example of this is in 2013 on Curie Division, 1678. Great team, went to Einstein 4 years in a row now. But that was the beginning of their streak. Not many people knew who they were. Their statistics weren't as good as they were normally. So but they still ended up seeding first. So a lot of teams were really hesitant to pick that. They picked the 4 seed, they picked the 6 seed, they picked, I think, the 3 seed. They all declined. So now none of those teams can pair up with the 2 seed, the 5 seed, the 7 seed, the 8 seed, whatever. Can't pair up. It allowed them to then jump to Einstein because they did that. They kept the top robots on the field from pairing up with each other. That's it.
Yes. Do you just not respond, or do you have to respond to decline or accept?
To accept or decline?
Yeah.
You should always respond. And generally, if you're in the top 8, or maybe even the top 10,
Yeah.
you have the ability to decline. Because sometimes, let's say that, like I said, the number 1 seed you don't want to play with. You don't have to accept it. There's no reason, if you don't think if you think you can have a better alliance on your own than you can with them, go ahead, decline. It's going to happen. Like, for example, if you guys were at Grits, 1746 declined the 1st seed at Grits. That's okay. They felt they could build a better alliance than if they could have been playing with the 1st seed. That's fine. Otherwise, if you're beneath the 10th seed, I would say be prepared to accept anybody. You want to play in the playoffs. Unless your robot is completely broken, you want to play. Any other questions? All right.
Oh, question.
Have you guys used any applications in the past for any electronic scouting, like
Did you guys build your hybrid system from scratch, or are you using a separate application?
So I think every year, like, we build off skills and stuff we've learned from past years doing hybrid, but we don't use like the same spreadsheet every year. I just like edit it a little, if that's what you're asking.
I was mainly just asking, prior to you guys building your own hybrid scouting system, did you use any other like third-party applications or anything like that?
No, we pretty much built our own. It's through Excel. There are a bunch of systems out there that can also do electronic scouting, and will export to CSV files, which can be opened in Excel. So there's options out there, but we specifically use our own hybrid system.
What are some advantages, this pertaining to electronic scouting, what are some advantages and disadvantages of using Excel over like creating an app for Android tablets, for example?
It's all preference. Excel can run macros a little bit more easily. Android tablets, you'll probably send into Google Sheets. That's Google Sheets has a little bit less functionality, but again, it can connect over the internet. So it's really a lot of preference. There's no reason to say, hey, this one's better than the other. Any other questions? Okay, so we're going to be here from 8 till 8:30 the rest of the time. If you guys have any questions you want to ask specifically to your team, specifically about our team, come ahead, come down. We're going to be here for the next 30 minutes. So hope you had a great time.
So it's a big thank you to G3 Robotics from Grady High School, Team 1648, and a huge thank you to all of the teams that presented over the last couple of weeks. This TE session has been the most successful it has been in a very long time. So a huge thank you to all the teams that made that happen, and thank you guys for showing up, and I hope you guys get something out of this every time. If your team is interested in presenting next year, we'll be sending out a form to fill out, say, later in the spring semester. So after build season, we'll ask you guys again, hey, who wants to present? What do you want to hear? And we'll set this whole thing up again. So be thinking about that, be thinking about what your team can do well, or be thinking about what your team doesn't do well so we can teach that towards you. So yeah, thank you all for coming. I hope you had a really great day. We'll be here. They'll be here for the next 30 minutes to answer any of your questions. Yeah, so thank you for coming, and give them a round of applause again. They did a great job.